Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to talk to Sam.
It's meant to be the other way around. I think I'm meant to say, thank you for being here, everyone.
Wait a minute. I'm not interviewing you?
No,
I'm
other way
totally
around.
prepared.
No,
Yeah.
you're in the uninterviewing question seat. And you have to say, welcome to the Times and the Sunday Times Cheltenham Literary Festival. And you didn't do that.
I'm sorry. See, nobody gave me the script.
Yeah, very good.
Welcome to the London Times.
No, wrong. We've done that bit. I had this whole preamble that I was going to say, and I don't even know if I'm going to say it now, because I think we've gone there.
Okay.
But suffice to say that 4 years ago, no one had heard of Cheryl Strayed.
I had heard of myself.
You had your,
right. But you guys hadn't.
Your
yes.
nearest and dearest, but we hadn't. Now, it's 6 million book sales, right?
I don't know. I've never.
6 million was the most most recent figure I could find, and somewhere a PR is saying no, it's more. A movie in which she was played by Reese Witherspoon, no less. Cheryl is renowned as the woman who walked 1,100 miles along the Pacific Coast Trail from the Mojave Desert to the Bridge of the Gods in Oregon, entirely alone, but for an enormous backpack. Did you call it Monster, or was it called Monster just for the film?
Oh, no, it was really, I called it Monster.
You called it Monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how the film thought of all that stuff.
And emotional baggage to more than match, I would say. Yeah. But more than book sales and movie deals, I'm pretty sure that this room and, in fact, the world is full of people that were inspired by Cheryl's story, and in some small way maybe embarked on their own journey because of it. Cheryl, your hike along the PCT is pretty well documented now, but let's go back, if you don't mind, to the moment when you decided to do it. What was the tipping point that set you there?
The tipping point. I think it was so many of those tipping points that we have, those moments of realization, like that there's this line in one of my favorite Rilke poems, "You must change your life." And I think that moment almost always comes after more discreet or sort of subtle realizations. And that's where I was at that moment in my life. It was late 1994, and my mom had died about 3.5 years earlier, very suddenly of cancer. And in those few years, in the wake of my mom's death, I really had slowly but surely self-destructed. And I think that, in retrospect, the 40-year-old me who was writing Wild could look back and very clearly see that self-destruction was about sorrow, it was about suffering, it was about, in some demented way, honoring my mom, or honoring my mother's memory, and to sort of show the world somebody extraordinary died, even though she looks ordinary from the outside. And so this awakening I had, this moment that I thought I must change my life, was really connected to my love for my mother too. Because what happened is I realized that, that I was destroying myself by getting involved with drugs and being wildly promiscuous. And, I'm not against promiscuity. I actually think a little dab of it is a good idea once in a while. But, it was this destructive, it had become something bad for me. And I realized, that the only way to actually honor my mom was to become somebody she raised, become the person she'd raised me to be, as it says in the movie. And so that's when I thought, I have to do something. I have to do something that will bring me back to that person I was on the inside, or that I am on the inside. It wasn't about becoming somebody else or escaping who I was. It was actually about just going back to who I was. And so, what happened is the PCT was just, in some ways, this idea. Like, I knew, okay, I feel the most whole in the wilderness. I knew I felt the most whole when I was doing something that was challenging and hard, and that demanded some kind of sacrifice. So, when I came upon that guidebook, I thought, this has to be the thing.
I just have to walk 1,000 miles on my own.
1,100 miles.
Sorry, 1,100.
Yeah. See, you're shorting me there on the mileage.
Short-changing you on
that.
Yeah,
so about 1,700 kilometers if I'm doing the conversion right.
That sounds even better, I think. Let's do it that way.
One of my favorite, Wild has been translated in all these languages, and of course I can't read them, but I always sort of try to see what they've done. In the Korean edition, there's the number on the book. It's something like 4,000 and some. So with each country, they just add another 1,000 kilometers or miles to my trek. So in Korea, I walked a really long way. So I'm huge there.
I mean, we won't talk a load about the trail, but what were you expecting when you set out?
Well, it's interesting. I did grow up in the wilderness. I spent my teen years in northern Minnesota. Have any of you, I can't see any of you, but make a sound if you've been to northern Minnesota. You have?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. It's a very difficult place and you have to be very hardy to survive there. And I didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity or running water. Life was like camping. It was really cold and really harsh, and then in the summer it was really hot and buggy and all kinds of things. And so I knew what the wilderness was like. It wasn't like I had idealized what it would be to go backpacking. And yet it's true that what happened is it was so much harder than I thought it would be. Part of that was really that I knew I was going to be out there hiking, and I was an avid hiker before my PCT trek, but I hadn't ever gone backpacking. And just carrying that much weight on your back is a big deal. There is a difference between day hiking and backpacking. Most people who have gone backpacking have learned that the hard way, like me. And it's because just the physical challenge. And it was so much more remote than I expected it to be. I didn't even see another person the first 8 days of my hike. And I don't know, have any of you gone 8 days straight in your life where you didn't even lay eyes on another human? Make a sound.
No one.
So,
No.
Me either since that time. And so when that happened to me, it was a profound experience. I could have quit on day 9 and written a book called 8 Days.
And it probably still would.
The subtitle would have been, They Were Really Wild. But it demanded something of me that I didn't know, that I didn't anticipate. And then, I think whenever that happens in life, that also happened to me when I became a mother. I think most parents experience, you have the baby and then you're like, you've got to be fucking kidding me. And it's like, this is the deal? This is what happens? And that's what I felt when I went on the Pacific Crest Trail.
And I guess because you'd walked 1,700 kilometers, you knew there was no putting the baby back.
That's right. You end up having to keep the damn baby. And it ends up being a good thing. But and that's how the hike was. I've become a really big advocate of what I call retrospective fun. So many people ask me for advice. I give advice as Dear Sugar, but people ask me for advice about their own hikes or their journeys. And what I always say, and I think this is a really important thing, this is true if you want to be a writer too, or to do any kind of endeavor that's hard, is that you have to know that even though it's going to be fun and glorious some of the time, it's going to be miserable and awful a lot of the time. All of the best things I've done have demanded everything from me. And, so often the feeling is, why did I do this? And I want to quit, and what have I gotten myself into? But then you push through that, and you look back on it and think, that's the best thing I ever did. And I would say that those things, all of those things that are the hardest things I've ever done, are also the best things I've ever done. And I think that's probably true for most of us. Is that true for you?
Yeah, totally, yeah. Totally.
What's the hardest thing you've done?
They're not here to listen to me, but probably giving up my job, deciding it would be a really good idea to launch a website with no money, no salary. And if my husband's in the audience, he's probably going, oh my God, here she goes. But yeah, it's a mad thing to do, but it's totally worth it.
It was worth it. It's called The Pool. It's an awesome website.
I didn't put her up to that.
No, you did. She
however.
didn't. I'm saying this legitimately because I mean it. Yeah.
Back to you. Was there a point on the trail where there must have been many points on the trail where you wanted to give up. Mm-hmm. What made you not?
Yeah. Well, a little bit of that thing that I just said. I knew. One of the things, it was hard every day, and it was also astounding every day. It was beautiful every day. It was full of that sense of I don't know what the word for it is, maybe a kind of grace. Like I always felt like, wow, this place is bigger and more beautiful and magnificent than me. And to be in the presence of it was incredibly motivating and powerful. And then just logistically, the funny thing about deciding to quit when you're miles from civilization is you have to walk there. So
Yeah.
so you're not quitting. You're like, oh, fuck this. And you're going. And so I actually many times decided to quit, but it turns out you just have to keep walking, right? There's no difference between quitting and not quitting. You still have to walk to town. So, I would be sometimes grumbling to myself and thinking, I am done with this. And those of you who read the book know that there were times, especially at the beginning, where I would just say, like, I'm getting out of here. And then, something else would happen. And, I think that's what resilience is about. And that's one of the most powerful lessons I learned on that hike that really did inform me in just about everything else I've done. Because I do think that resilience is just about surviving the moment and greeting the next one, and then surviving the next one and greeting it. And so when I say things like in the book, like one of my methods of sort of dealing with it when it was hard is just counting each step, because you can always take one more step. And when I was writing Wild, I obviously I had the experience of the hike. I took the hike in the summer of '95 when I was 26. Years later, I began writing about it, and I always knew what I learned on the trail in a just organic way that was in my life. But of course, when I was writing the book, I had to do this other thing where I, tried to sort of to tell the story of my journey in a way that wasn't just about me, but that was about the human experience. And I really realized like what a metaphor long distance hiking was for so many of the challenges we face. So many. Even if we go, to talk about grief, so much of what I was doing on the trail was trying to figure out how do I live without my mother, because I really felt that I couldn't live without her when she died, and I know that some of you in the room have had that feeling about a loss of your own, and it does turn out that the way that you live with grief or any kind of sorrow is that you just keep going through the days, and you learn how to carry it. And so, that's essentially what happened to me in a really literal and physical way on that hike.
It took you 17 years after finishing the hike to write Wild. Why do you think it took you so long?
Well, by the time, I started writing it about 13 or 14 years after the hike, and then it was published 17 years later. Is that right? Yeah, about that.
I think so, yeah.
Well, I really didn't have anything to say about the hike until I did, and what I mean in that big way, there's that sense that a writer has to have something to say about an experience, and when I teach memoir, I'm always talking to my students about this. I think that memoir is this really misunderstood form. People think you have to be. I've had people say to my face in a sort of cheerful way, "You have to be a narcissist to write a memoir." And and that's not true. You have to be a narcissist to write a crappy memoir. I'm waiting for Trump's memoir soon. He's asked me to blurb it, but I think that what memoirists do, who are like doing their actual work, is they're trying again to find to use the self to find the story, the human story, and so. The point of Wild wasn't, I'm so interesting, I took this big wilderness hike and nobody did it as good as me, nor is it, I loved my mother more than anyone else loved their mother, and so come here and let me tell you about my deep grief. The point was to tap into, to have an understanding about what happened to me that summer and during that era of my life in a way that transcended just my own life. That essentially, I always think about, what are the questions that you're trying to answer? What are the things you're seeking in the work when you're writing? And I knew in my life by the time I started writing Wild what that hike meant, what my mother's death meant, what my grief was. But for me to really do that bigger thing of putting those things in the human context took some time. And so, I wasn't sitting around going, I just have to get smart enough to write this book. I was writing. I wrote my first novel, Torch. That was really that book that I was kind of writing in my head when I was hiking the trail. And I was having babies, and I was, doing all the things that people do and writers do. And so I just wrote Wild when it was time to do it.
And Torch is your only novel, isn't it? Would you write any more fiction, do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One on the cards?
Let me have a sip of wine. Yeah, it's so funny that people think of me first as a memoirist. It's obviously because of Wild and what happened with Wild. But, I studied, I trained as a novelist, as a fiction writer. My first, it never occurred to me that I would someday write a memoir when I was, really a young writer. I learned from fiction, and I still, really think of memoir and fiction as being basically very close literary forms. One is you draw on your own life and you tell stories about real things that happened, and the other you just make a bunch of stuff up, usually which is just a kind of disguise of your real life. And I think that you have to achieve the same things on the page. That same sense of why is this writer telling this story? What is this writer having to say about the human experience? And so I always think that I'll do both. I'll do memoirs and novels throughout my life.
Fiction played an enormous part, didn't it, in your childhood and in fact in your walk on the trail?
Yeah.
How did you pick the books that you took on the trail?
Pretty randomly. I wish there are all these things that happened on that hike on the PCT that if I knew that someday Reese Witherspoon was starring in a movie of it, I would have been more calculated. I really just was, it's like I would have. There were so many things I would have done differently, but there wasn't.
PCT book club, right?
What'd you say?
The PCT book club.
That's right. That's right. But one of the things I did is I just. Like anyone, if I just read my whole library, it would be years. I would spend years just reading the books I have now. So right before I went on my hike on the PCT, I just looked at all the books that I had meant to read and hadn't on my shelf and tossed, them in various boxes. There wasn't any sort of calculated.
So you didn't take your desert island books or anything like that?
No. With the exception of Audrey and Rich's The Dream of a Common Language, which was a book that meant a lot to me, and I took it with me. All those books that I tossed into the boxes were simply, books I had on hand and hadn't read yet. But they ended up being some of my favorite books of all time. Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. It was a really unique reading experience, and those of you who've traveled solo with books probably know what I mean about this, is that when the book is your only company, it takes on such importance.
There's no way you would know now, really, but can you imagine doing that walk but with technology? That would have changed the experience so entirely.
No, and when I was writing Wild, I wasn't quite aware. It was through the process of writing Wild that I really came to consciousness about one piece of Wild is really, in some ways, a story about a world that's dead and gone now. A story about a time in our existence when we could go into the wilderness and there wasn't a question of whether you took technology with you. It was simply you didn't have the option. And, I wasn't tethered to anything. I didn't have any devices that allowed anything to be piped into my ears. I didn't have any devices that allowed me to have a connection or contact with anyone. The only way that I could talk to anyone was face to face if they were in front of me, or the few times that I would get to a town that would have a payphone. And I think that it's really, I feel so lucky that I had that experience. I was alone in a way that people on the trail, I think, don't get to be alone anymore because, and me too, when I go hiking now, there's a phone in my back pocket. I've tweeted from the Pacific Crest Trail, which is kind of sad. It's kind of cool and it's kind of sad, I think. And not because I'm not that I'm anti-technology. I really love that connection, but there is something to be said for genuinely being alone too. It was on, can I tell you my cell phone story?
Go for it, yeah.
Okay, so it was on the PCT that I first, and this is one thing that I wish I'd put in the book, and things just get lost in the editing process. But so those of you who read the book might remember my first stop in Kennedy Meadows, where I have like this enormous pack, and I meet this kind of Eagle Scout guy, sort of fatherly type, who goes through my pack with me and helps me get rid of things. He finds this big pack of condoms and things like that. So he was this ultra lightweight backpacker. And the other thing is, in 1995, there was hardly any consciousness of ultra lightweight backpacking. So it was still a new thing. And he would do things like his toothbrush, he cut it in half, so he would only, he didn't even want to carry the full weight of the toothbrush. He was kind of a crazy person about this. And the one exception he made is he had this huge plastic block that looked like a brick, and then on the front it had these buttons with numbers. And I said, well, what is it? He was taking it out of his pack and he was sort of cursing it. And I said, what is it? And he said, it's this damn thing. He probably didn't say damn because he was a Christian. He said, it's this dang thing that is called a cell phone. And he said, this company is trying to develop it, and they asked me to carry it with me on the Pacific Crest Trail and turn it on like at a certain time every day to see if it gets reception. And he's like to call this number every day. And he'd been carrying it for 6 weeks when I met him, and it had never once worked. And, he was like, this is, and I was like, well, what are they thinking? And he's like, they're thinking that people will like have this thing and carry it around with them so that they can call someone anytime they want, or they can be called anytime they want. And I remember distinctly thinking, whoever thought of this idea is an idiot, which is clearly why I'm not like in technology product development. But I remember thinking like this was such a bad idea that people would be carrying a phone. And this guy, we are all in agreement. So he left this thing in the PCT hiker free box. So somebody has like, an early cell phone that doesn't work.
It's ironic that he would take it at all, given that he wouldn't let you carry 12 condoms.
I know. Well, he dumped it. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, Wilde is almost painfully honest, and you don't cut yourself any slack, or indeed anyone else. Was that tough? I mean, do you look back now and wish you had not been so honest?
If I had known so many people would read Wilde, I wouldn't have put half that stuff in there. No, I'm teasing. No, I think it's really important to be honest. It's obviously uncomfortable and hard and sometimes mortifying. I mean, there are so many things that I've written about myself that I think, I have to sort of take a deep breath and just say, okay, do this. But, I think that the job of a memoirist, the job of a writer, no matter whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, is again, we go to our artists to hear the truth. And the absolute like number one thing that a writer must do is tell the truth, and in a big way, in a deep way. And when you're writing about yourself, that means actually saying what happened, and then going beneath that too, and interrogating those things that you think about what happened and why. And the hardest thing for me wasn't doing that with myself, but really sort of paying attention to that line when I was writing about other people, because I don't feel like I have obviously the same right to do that about other people's lives. And so, for me, that fine balance between revealing myself and doing my best to sort of harm other people as little as possible in that process. So it's a tricky balance. Do you think I should be embarrassed about things I wrote about?
No, definitely not. But I just did wonder, when you saw Reese Witherspoon shagging two guys up a back alley, you kind of wished you hadn't put it in.
Well, see, that's the thing. I didn't. I didn't do that. One of the few things I've not done is I've never shagged two people in an alley. So
they put that in and you didn't do it?
They put that in the movie.
Oh, great.
They put that in the
Excellent.
movie. I'm so glad that I came to the UK and set the record straight.
I'm so glad I allowed you to.
I have that experience to look forward to. But if anyone's free later. But no, I didn't do that. And it's the one piece of the movie, I would say, that makes me wince because, Jean-Marc Vallée and Nick Hornby, who wrote the script, and Reese, and everyone wanted the movie to be as accurate as possible. I was really involved with the making of the film. But I didn't intervene when it came to that scene because I understood what the director was trying to do. He had to sort of establish my promiscuity in a way that was, that cinema demands a much more visual story than is in the book. In the book, that promiscuity is a lot more nuanced, I guess. And so I had to let that go. I had to sort of accept that if the story or the art that I made is the book, and then the film is an interpretation of that. And I do think that, one of the things I did learn about revealing the self or showing, I guess less flattering portraits of myself in some lights is that people feel, when you're vulnerable, people open their hearts to you. People feel included. I think the most powerful thing that books can do for us is make you feel like, okay, me too. I'm not the only one who's struggled or who's felt scared or weak or vulnerable. I think that telling, when you risk telling the truth about the darker parts of your life, what you risk, what you get, the thing you get for that is so many people gathering around you saying that they identify.
I mean, it struck me, we were talking backstage about the quotes that are used in the film as a narrative device that you didn't actually use in real life. But it really struck me that you've used quotes in the book that inspire you. And now if you Google Cheryl Strayed, which I'm sure you do all the time, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of inspirational quotes that are from you. Does that feel weird?
Yes, it does. It feels very weird. I mean, and there's this book. So my book was actually my UK publisher's idea. I got an email one day.
Brave Enough.
Brave Enough. Oh yeah, let's say the title of the book, Brave Enough. So, and I had to think about it because the experience I was having. So my book Wild came out, and then another book, Tiny Beautiful Things, which is my Dear Sugar columns. And I was getting so many emails with photographs, people photographing their arms or their feet or their bums or whatever, and there would be a quote from one of my books tattooed on them. It's something when somebody's tattooed a line you wrote on their arse, And
I guess it's kind of nice.
On Instagram, these memes and Twitter and Facebook and so forth. And I just I love quotes myself, and so for me to have somebody else quoting me, it just seemed very strange. And so at Atlantic, my UK publisher said, why don't we just gather all of these together in a book? And so I did that, and what I did, it's really a book that the internet made. All I had to do was, I went on Pinterest and Instagram and all of these social media sites, and I typed in Cheryl Strayed quotes, and I was so amazed to see how many came up, and the ones that came up are those that I included in the book.
And I have Post-it notes on my desk that have Cheryl Strayed quotes on.
I know, isn't
No, they're really cute.
They are cute, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Dear Sugar then, and Tiny Beautiful Things, which is the book of columns. Do you think that writing the Dear Sugar column in between Torch and Wild influenced the way you wrote Wild?
No, because, Wild and Tiny Beautiful Things were really written on top of each other, but I wrote Wild first. So I finished the whole first draft of Wild, and then sent the book to my editor. And I was in this wonderful moment of a writer's life where I had worked so hard on Wild, and I felt like I had just, sort of scorched myself and written it in my blood, and sent it to my editor. And you always know that the editor, in her silence, his or her silence, is preparing notes, to send back to you to tell you all the things that aren't good about your book. But there is this little tiny window, so that's coming. But then when it doesn't come, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come, you can start to sort of delusionally think, maybe I am the first person in history who's ever written just a perfect book from the start. and the editor is not going to send me that letter. So I was in this state of delusion when I got an email from my friend, the writer Steve Almond, who co-hosts the podcast I do. Do any of you listen to the podcast? All right.
Okay.
It's called Dear Sugar Radio. But Steve Almond wrote me an email, and he said, I'm writing this column for this new website called The Rumpus. It's this anonymous advice column called Dear Sugar, and nobody reads it, and I'm not really into writing it. Do you want to take it over? And it pays nothing. And I was
So you said, yeah, that's
I was
great.
like, this is the story of my life so far. So I'll do it. And so I did it. And so it was, I'd already written Wild when I first began writing the column. And then, of course, I did get the letter from my editor saying all of these things need to be worked on. So I was doing the revisions of Wild while I was writing the Dear Sugar column. So if anything, I would say writing Wild influenced Tiny Beautiful Things more than the other way around, if that makes sense.
And Tiny Beautiful Things, you've teamed up with Reese again, haven't you, to work on an HBO series?
Yes, yes.
And you didn't write the script for Wild, but I think you are working on the script for Tiny Beautiful Things. Is that right?
Yeah. So Tiny Beautiful Things, a couple of things are going on with that. Actually, opening at the Public Theater in New York on November 15th is this stage adaptation of Tiny Beautiful Things, starring Nia Vardalos.
Did you write that?
I wrote it. I mean, the play is like the book on stage, but it's being adapted by Nia Vardalos, who's of My Big Fat Greek Wedding fame. Was that a big movie over here?
Yeah.
Years ago. So the star of that movie is going to do a stage adaptation of the book, and then my husband and I are doing a show for HBO based on the book, but a very different kind of take than the play.
And Laura Dern, who played your mother in the movie, is
going to star in the HBO show. Yeah.
Cool. So go back to the movie of Wild for a bit. Both Reese and Laura Dern, who is pretty astonishing, I think, as your mum, were nominated for loads of awards, including the Oscars, but didn't win any. I don't think maybe one. No, none.
No. Thanks for the reminder.
No. But I'm going to give you a chance to just slag everyone off for their error of judgment.
No, they both Laura and Reese were nominated.
And they should have won.
They should have won. But that's how those things go. I always want everyone to win.
Yeah, but some more than others.
Yeah, and but it is. I think that's so hard. Those kinds of competitions where there's all this amazing work. Don't you guys feel this way? You watch these movies and they all deserve. I would be the worst person to be on one of those committees.
Do you think in any way, because Wild was described as Hollywood's most feminist film of the year, do you think that counted against it when awards season came around?
Oh, there's no question. No question. It was really interesting to see what happened with Wild, which I first want to say, was a big success. One of the things that people, I think, don't quite realize is that Wild was an independent film. It was made for about $15 million, which sounds like a ridiculous amount of money to me, but is actually, a low budget. It was, an indie film. And the reason that it was an indie film is that that Reese Witherspoon and her producing partner, Bruna Papandreou, from the start wanted to honor, their call and their word to me, which was, to really make a movie about a strong woman who did things, some things that sort of break the codes, I guess, of what women are supposed to do or be. And they didn't want studio executives saying, we can't have a woman on screen saying fuck, or we can't have a woman who has an abortion or has sex with two guys in an alley or whatnot. And so this is why they chose that path. And I think that, there are so many positive things about, like the film came out, it was reviewed really well. And, and all of the kind of most important places got beautiful reviews. And the audiences came to the theaters and loved it. And so then when it came to the awards season, it got nominations for a lot of things, but it was also overlooked in very significant ways when it came to things like Best Film
Best
or,
Picture
those kind of big categories. And, I think that pretty measurably you could look at like, okay, these films that were nominated got, reviews here, there, and there, and comparing it to Wild, it was really actually pretty clear that certain groups of people, many of those people who have Oscar ballots, just simply do not take those kinds of movies seriously. And by those kinds of movies, I think, movies about women. Wild is really actually about a woman walking alone through the wilderness. And one of the most fascinating conversations for me, or observations, I should say, is so much of the press about Wild the movie. In the headline, even it would talk about me. It would say like that I was an unlikable, how amazing it was that this like film about a quote unlikable woman was on screen. And it was a really fascinating thing. What I realized is like, because I've had a lot of troubles in my life, but being likable hasn't been like actually a challenge for me. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but most people generally like me. I don't have, but in Hollywood vernacular, basically I'm in the unlikable category for the simple reason that I don't know, that I can't quite figure out what it, like it's a certain kind of language they use about essentially a woman who's not compliant.
It's just that you weren't living what they consider an appropriate life.
But
guess also,
so.
There's no love interest. I mean, you walk that,
right.
You walk the PCT. You don't get saved by a man. Similarly, you don't kill a bear. Do battle with a bear or kill
That's
anyone.
Right.
Or
yeah,
that's the key.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
And that's likable,
to me.
I guess.
I guess so. I mean, I was fascinated by that. I was like, okay, the only time in my whole life I've been called unlikable was in this Hollywood experience. And of course, they weren't calling me unlikable, but me on the screen. That idea of a woman who, makes a few mistakes and then tries to sort of seek redemption, which is essentially the storyline of every movie featuring a male protagonist that we've seen, right?
Yeah. I think it's just the missing bear. Really.
That's right.
That's where you went wrong.
I did encounter bears on my hike, but the budget was too low for the movie. They couldn't hire any bears. That was one thing I said to John Mark, can we please have a bear? They were like, we have a fox and a llama and a snake. A lot of people think that fox in the movie, how many of you saw the movie and they think that the fox was fake? Did you think the fox was like a digital fox? It was a real fox. It was quite a thing when the fox came to set.
It feels kind of mythical, though.
There was a real rattlesnake, and the real rattlesnake really bit somebody on the crew. Is that crazy?
That could have been really expensive. A bear might have been cheaper.
But the venom wasn't in it, so the guy just got cut.
Okay.
With those rattlesnake fangs. Has anyone in here been bit by a snake? Nobody? Interesting.
It's such a shame we can't see your hands.
I know, yeah. You have to cry out if you've been bit by a rattlesnake. I always kind of hope to be bit by a rattlesnake, but like in retrospect, It's one of those things that you're glad to have had done rather than
for the experience.
Have happened. For the experience, it would have made for a good book.
If only you'd thought of that sooner, or had a cell phone.
That's right.
If that had happened. Reese said that when she launched Pacific Standard, it was in part because her daughter was 13 and she wanted her to see movies with female heroes, leads, real life stories. Do you have the same concerns for Bobby, your daughter, who's named after your mum?
Yeah, well, not just Bobby. I mean, I think that one of the most important things is also to really bring boys into this conversation. I think that I've always thought feminism benefits men and boys as much as it benefits women and girls. It's really about expanding our ideas of who we get to be, that they aren't limited by the constructs of gender. And so, I feel like it's really important that we all see ourselves in all kinds of people, people of different races, different generations, different times and ages and cultures and genders. And so, it feels really important to me that's modeled, and I think that's happening. I mean, I think that those of you probably have heard about, the whole uproar that's happening in the United States right now because of Trump and his latest sort of this recording of him talking about women in the ways that he talks about women. And I think that, that kind of uproar that's happening is about the fact that feminism has actually triumphed. And And it's not just women who are pissed off and offended by this kind of stuff, it's men too. And so I do think that that's, certainly everything I do has that kind of mission of expanding those ideas. I don't do it with a sense of like, I'm gonna convey a feminist message, but I am glad that is the message that gets delivered to girls and boys.
In a second, we're going to go to questions, because I think that even though we won't be able to see if anybody's got any questions,
I think there are
shout
roving
loud
microphones
enough.
somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
But just before we do, I want to just ask you one. Oh, yes, there we go. Can I ask one more question, and then we'll go to the questions?
Oh, there you all are.
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh my God! Put the lights back up. That's terrifying.
I had no idea. Hello, people up there.
Oh God.
My gosh.
Whoa. Just one more question before we throw open the floor. There's a really an amazing moment in the book and the film when your mother learned she was dying. And she said, "I've never been in the driver's seat of my own life. I've always been somebody's daughter or mother or wife." How much do you think that influenced the rest of your life?
Oh, it's everything. It's one of the most influential moments of my life, because of course by the time my mom said that to me, I had come to understand that was true of her. That I had seen my mom in the last years of her life. She was a college student. We both, those of you who know, who read the book, know that we both went to college together. I had grown up poor, and I didn't know really how I was going to get to college. I had to pay my own way. And in the way of many Americans, I was, in debt to my college. I mean, I paid off my student loan debt from my bachelor's degree on my 44th birthday. So that gives you an idea of how
Jesus.
it was. But when I applied to college, I just applied to one because I didn't even know what the process was. And when they accepted me, they sent me a letter saying, if you attend this college, your parents can take classes for free. And my mother saw this and said, "I've always wanted to go to college." To which I thought, there is no way in hell you are going with me. But, because, when you're 17, I don't need to explain, right? Would any of you have enjoyed that? No, I didn't think so. But, I really didn't want her to go with me, but I also knew, I knew even then, even in the height of my youthful arrogance, that my mom had been this, incredible person against, many difficult circumstances. She was this positive, joyous, loving figure in my life, and that I'd hit the jackpot really when I got her as a mother. And I didn't want to stand in the way of her in that opportunity. So she went to college with me, and we went that first year together, and it was just like the whole world opened up. And one of the worlds that opened up for me was the ability for me to see my mom. And I think that we all go through this. Obviously, as we grow up, we start to realize our parents are humans too, humans separate from what they provide for us. And so for me, to see my mom, when she died, we were both just about to graduate, and she died on the spring break of our senior year of college, and she was 2 classes short of her bachelor's degree. And she was really telling me the truth when she said, "I've never been in the driver's seat. I've always been somebody's daughter or mother or wife." And it was a very painful thing for me for many reasons. One is that, I was her daughter. She was my mother. Part of what had held her back was me, my existence. And she didn't mean it that way. Obviously, she always said having me and my siblings was the best thing she'd ever done, and I believe her. But I also know that, so much of her adult life was constrained by meeting our needs. And so I did take that to heart. I felt like part of my mission here was to fulfill my dreams, to fulfill my promise, to make good on all of those things that I wanted to be, because in so many ways I was doing it for her as well as me. I think that's what we all do. I mean, so many of you in the room, I'm sure, relate to this, that you had parents who made so many sacrifices for you. And, in the end, it was what saved me. Just like that feeling of understanding that I could not bear to be a woman who didn't make good on that promise, because it wouldn't just be squandering my own life, it would be squandering her legacy as well. So I did.
So on that note, we'll open the floor to questions. I'm sure there are loads, and we can see you all now.
I'm sorry we don't have wine for all of you, but I will drink to you.
Okay. Please,
Hello.
Hi, Cheryl. In the book, you make it quite clear that for a lot of the time that you were on the trail, you didn't think you could do it. And I wonder what your thoughts are now about doing things that you don't think you can do.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that what I've come to realize is so often when things are hard, part of doing something hard is battling that idea of you can't do it, and almost welcoming it. I certainly feel this way about writing. I always think there is no way I can pull this off one more time, and then I always pull it off, And so, for me, the shift was like not interpreting that sense of doubt or fear as an indicator that I was doing something wrong or that I shouldn't be doing something, but rather as like, oh yes, these are the things that you feel when you're doing something hard. You feel afraid, you have doubt, you feel skeptical. And it's just like part of that process, and almost, welcoming its presence as an indicator that you're doing the right thing. Okay. Yes?
Did you keep records of what you were doing as you went along? Or how did you manage to keep, your book is so clear about what you did when, and yet you wrote it so much later.
Yeah, I did keep a journal. And I didn't keep a journal because I thought that someday I'd write a book about it. All through my 20s and 30s, I really was such an avid journaler. So when I was writing Wild, it was incredibly helpful to see like, oh, okay, I was here this day doing this, and this is what I was thinking, and this is who I met, and this is what I saw and felt. So there was that. There was also, obviously just memory, and part of being a writer, I think a memoirist especially, is like, I do have a good memory, and I also find that once you start writing about things, your mind opens up. I promise you, if I made you all do a writing assignment right now in this room, if we locked the doors and everyone got a piece of paper, and I asked you to write something that happened a long time ago, a lot of you, your first reaction would be to say, I don't really remember. But once you start writing, you do start to remember. It's the closest thing I can liken it to is when you see an old friend from long ago, and you start talking about old times, and you go from thinking you don't remember to going, oh my gosh, now, through those prompts of that conversation, it really does open things up. So, it was a combination of having that journal and just doing that deep work that writing entails. Yes.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming to the UK, and thank you also so much for writing such an incredible book
Thank
that
you.
I'm sure has been really meaningful to a lot of people here.
Thank you.
My question is about the doubtless enormous increase in demands on your time as someone who's written what you've written and done what you've done, and how that competes with the need for deep work as a writer to produce that kind of work in the first place. So I suppose my question is, what are you working on now? Are you managing to work on anything right now? And can you tell us anything about that at all?
Yeah, the challenge of my life is what you just described right now. That the great thing about the success with Wild and what's happened is for the first time in my life, I actually can support myself as a writer, and I don't have to be a waitress or be something else in addition to my writing. But yeah, absolutely, and it's so powerful. I mean, it's so amazing to me that all of you people have come today. Like I never expected this, but that I got it then so it's a beautiful gift, but it also is then how do I write? Because writing is about silence and solitude and deep concentration. So I am getting back to that now, and I'm working on another book. I'm hoping to have it done within the year or so-ish. And I was writing a novel and a memoir kind of simultaneously, and I decided I'm going to finish the memoir first. So I can tell you I don't really like to talk about what my next book is about, but it's another memoir, and it's about me and you. You just don't know it yet. Promise. I'll keep all your secrets, I promise. Okay, whoever's next. Whoever has the microphone. Yes, there we go.
Yeah, we live in a day and age now of like hair straighteners and makeup and hair dryers and all that. When you finish the hike, or even when you finish like the first 8 days, and you looked at yourself in the mirror, like, what did you see? Did you recognize yourself? Were you glowing? Or what was it physically like?
It's really such an interesting experience as a woman, especially I think. But yeah, so I only saw myself a few times that whole summer, and to go from a world where you're pretty much seeing yourself several times a day, either on purpose or by accident, right? I went to there was nothing reflecting me back to me. And then, so the few times that I did see myself in the mirror, they're all in the book. I wrote about them because they were profound moments, because I could see myself in a different way. And I both was appalled by what I saw, and I liked what I saw. And when I got off the trail, I distinctly remember, I was sort of reunited with these items that I didn't have on the trail, like lipstick, and just things that I do to make myself look prettier than I am. And when I first used makeup for the first time after I got off the trail, I had to like immediately take it all off before I went out the door, because I felt clownish. I felt like I looked strange to myself. And then, and then that passed, and I got used to looking like a clown again. But, it was a different way of seeing myself. And I was 26 too. I was really still struggling with, I think so many young people, again, especially young women, they have such a complicated relationship to their beauty or to their attractiveness to people in the world, and how that can be used to get love. And I think that it sort of reordered my relationship to that. It helped me enormously. Don't worry, I'm still totally fucked up about that stuff. But I mean, it got me one step closer to not being so fucked up. So, whoever's next, yes. Who has the microphone? I don't see who.
Any more questions?
Yes.
We have time for 2 more.
Oh yes, there's people waving their hands. Maybe up over here.
Oh, who's gonna? Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I love Dear Sugar.
Thank you.
I listen to it every week whenever it's out. It's like a drop of wisdom for me.
Thanks.
I just wondered how, the responsibility of giving advice to people, because sometimes it must be really difficult if someone's got a really, serious problem and you're giving them advice on it. Do you ever struggle with that?
Yeah, I think really deeply about what I say. And I think that the biggest thing for me is always the way I position myself as an advice giver, both in the column and on the podcast, is that, I've never said, I am the one who knows the answers, or position myself in any place kind of superior or all-knowing in relation to the letter writer. And I think that that's really important. So often when we seek advice, it's not really that we want somebody to just tell us what to do. We want somebody to help us think about it better. And so that's what I think I'm doing. I really try to help somebody, grapple with it more deeply, or I try to point out things that they themselves told me that they might not be conscious of, the way they've described themselves or the situation they're in or the relationship they're in. It can sometimes help to just point those things out to somebody. And, I do feel that in some ways, so the help I'm giving is really just being that extra voice in the room. It's not as somebody who's wagging my finger and saying, do this, even though sometimes I do tell people what to do. Because sometimes it's so clear. But usually when I tell people what to do, it's just because it is so clear, even they know it. They just can't. Most of us actually know, right? I mean, this is one of the things I really have learned through this process of giving advice, is most of us actually know what's wrong with us, or what we need to change, or why things are so messed up. And it's just that it's really hard sometimes to make that change. It's really hard to hold that truth and live it out, because it can cause us a lot of turmoil in the short term. So I really usually just try to point that out to people.
Okay.
One more question. Yes. Okay, I don't know. Now there's a competition. This fellow in the front.
Hi, Cheryl.
I'm sorry, you guys. Hello.
How surreal was it to watch your daughter play your younger self in the film?
Oh, it was amazing. So those of you who saw the film, the little girl who played me was my daughter, Bobby. And one of the things that she would say when people would ask her, what her role was, she would say, "I'm a memory." Which is so poetic and true, isn't it? Because we all remember our child selves, but very few of us get to the opportunity to see our own children pretend to be that child and act it out. And what was so profound about it was that, I said to my daughter before she even auditioned, okay, you're gonna have to enact some of the happiest moments of my life and some of the saddest. And she knew that my father was abusive and violent and awful, and she knew that my mother was this good mother, and she was like, okay, she was prepared for it, but I wasn't prepared for it quite. When we're on the set, there's a scene that the man who plays my father is chasing my daughter and the little boy who played my brother and Laura Dern out of the house. Laura Dern has all this makeup on that she has like a blackened eye and a bloody face, and the father is chasing them out of the house, and he's screaming profanities at them and threatening them, and Laura is gathering up the kids and loading them into this car. And it was this night that we were shooting. It was freezing cold and pouring rain, and my daughter had to run in bare feet in her pajamas over and over again through, real freezing, rain, and it was, they're shooting this movie, and between each take, my husband and I would go up to our daughter and say, he's really a nice guy. He doesn't mean any of this, and and the guy would be like, yeah, I'm nice, and then like a moment later he'd go, you fucking whore, and my daughter kept saying, I know. And she also made this guy give her $1 for every curse word he said. But there was this moment where my daughter finally said, I know, Mom, you just don't say that to me anymore. I know it's pretend. Go away, And so once I realized she was okay, I really just stood there and watched this. And I realized it was a strange thing to realize, because of course, I've lived my life and I know my life, but it was once I let go of my daughter a little bit, I was like, wow, this is pretend for her, and it wasn't pretend for me, and it wasn't really actually a nice guy, and it wasn't really anyone saying cut, at the end of that. It was actually getting in the car and driving away, and driving around with my mom, and then coming back, and it was a kind of moment that I didn't expect. That it was like the life gives you so many surprises, and one of the great surprises was that there was this little bit of healing left. And it was, I felt again part of my mom's legacy, that that she finally did walk away from that situation, and I did get to then have the rest of my childhood be a happy one. That then her granddaughter and her grandson get to have a life where it is just a pretend thing. That they really don't know any people who act like that. And it was, it was a big moment of not surreality, but I would say deep truth, the opposite of surreality. That it was a moment where I could see kind of all of life there, captured in this experience of my daughter playing me. If any of you guys get the opportunity to have your kids do that, say yes. It was pretty amazing. And Laura Dern playing my mom. My mom was a 5-foot brunette. All her life she wanted to be a tall, willowy blonde. And so I mean, there is nobody taller or blonder than Laura Dern, so, you know, you never know how it's going to turn out for you, right? Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. I'm going to sign books in a tent, I think. How appropriate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.